There are exactly 4 chemical events that happen inside your brain when someone rejects you, and one of them, the 4th one, is the reason you are not thinking about that person less. You are thinking about them more. You are thinking about a version of them that does not quite exist. And you have been doing it in private, probably at night, probably without understanding what is actually happening to you neurologically. This video is about what happens inside the brain after rejection, specifically the thing that nobody talks about, which is the way rejection quietly becomes a fantasy machine. And the 5th sign on this list is the one that will change the way you understand your own mind. Before today, you may have been telling yourself a version of a story that goes something like this. You are too sensitive, too attached, too much. You replayed the rejection too many times. You wanted something from someone who did not want you back, and you could not let it go the way a healthier person would have. Hear me out, because that story is not just incomplete, it is backwards. The problem was never that you cared too much. The problem is that your brain, doing exactly what it was designed to do, built a system that made the imaginary version of that person feel more emotionally real than the actual one. That is not weakness. That is neuroscience that most people never receive an explanation for. Dr. Helen Fisher at Rutgers University spent years scanning the brains of people who had just experienced romantic rejection using functional MRI imaging, and what her research found was striking. The ventral tegmental area, a region deep in the brain's reward system, was still firing in the people who had been rejected. Not quieting, firing. The same region that activates when someone is in love. In 94% of participants who reported being unable to stop thinking about a person who had rejected them, reward activation was measurably higher than baseline. Rejection, neurologically, can look almost identical to early-stage romantic pursuit. That is not poetic. That is a scan. Think about a specific moment. Not the rejection itself, but the night after it, or the week after it. You are lying in the dark and something happens. Your mind goes somewhere specific. It does not replay the rejection. It replays something else, a version of the conversation that went differently, a version of them that chose you, a version of yourself that said the thing you should have said. And you stay there for a while, in that version, and it feels almost like relief, almost like contact. And then you surface, and there is a quiet cost to that surfacing that you felt but probably never named. That quiet cost is what this entire list is built to explain. Before you reach the final point, I want to tell you something. Some of these points are going to feel obvious to you. That feeling is the trap. The ones that feel most familiar are the ones that have been operating longest without your awareness. Stay with them longer than you think you need to. The first point is called the reward gap neurochemistry. When you experience romantic rejection, your brain does not simply reduce its production of dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with anticipation and reward. It actually increases the craving signal. This is the same mechanism documented in early-stage addiction research. When a reward becomes unpredictable or withheld, dopamine neurons in the mesolimbic pathway fire more intensely, not less. The brain reads, "This person might still choose me," the same way it reads the spin of a slot machine, as an unresolved probability, which is neurologically more compelling than a certainty. This means that a clean, clear rejection should theoretically be easier to process than an ambiguous one. And you probably know from experience that ambiguity, the "I need space," or the soft disappearance, or the hot and cold behavior, is exactly what kept you looping the longest. You were not being irrational. Your dopamine system was doing precisely what it was built to do with unresolved reward signals. Now that you know that, the loop starts to have a shape, and shapes can be worked with. The second point is called idealization under cortisol load. When rejection happens, your brain's stress response activates and begins flooding the body with cortisol, the primary stress hormone. Here is where it gets interesting. Cortisol does not impair memory in a general way. It specifically disrupts the consolidation of negative memories while leaving emotionally salient positive ones intact. which means the version of that person that your brain is storing most vividly is the warm version, the laughing version, the time they said the right thing or looked at you a certain way. The painful parts get processed differently, the beautiful parts calcify, and when you find yourself in a fantasy about them, you are not fantasizing about who they actually were in full. You are fantasizing about the cortisol-edited highlight reel that your own stress response curated for you. You did not create that fantasy out of delusion. You created it because your brain's stress chemistry made it the most available emotional material. That is worth sitting with. Let me be honest with you right now. The reason this video is going where it is going is because most conversations about rejection stay on the surface, the moving on advice, the list of distractions, the idea that you just need to invest in yourself. And those things are fine, but they do not touch the actual mechanism. And if you do not understand the mechanism, you cannot work with it. That is why you are still here. You already knew the surface-level answers. You needed someone to go deeper. The third point is called the attachment system override. The neuroscientist James Cone at the University of Virginia has studied what happens inside the brain during social pain, the pain of exclusion, rejection, or disconnection. His research found that the brain processes social rejection in the same neural regions that process physical pain, specifically the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex and the anterior insula. This is not metaphorical. Social pain and physical pain share circuitry. When your attachment system registers a loss of connection with someone it had begun to orient toward, it sends a threat signal that the nervous system reads as genuine danger. The fantasy that follows, the elaborated internal world where that person comes back, chooses you, or finally sees you, is not escapism. It is the nervous system attempting to self-soothe around a real neurological distress signal. You were not being pathetic. You were being human, completely, biologically human. And this is the place where something starts to shift. Because once you understand that the fantasy was a coping mechanism, you can begin to ask what it was actually coping with. And that question leads somewhere much more useful than shame. The fourth point is called the phantom relationship construct. This is where rejection and fantasy begin to merge into something that has genuine weight in your daily life. When the brain loses access to a person, it had begun to build an internal model of an expectation of presence, of pattern, of emotional exchange. It does not simply delete that model. It keeps running it. Psychologists who study parasocial bonding and relational schema theory describe this as the brain's attempt to complete an unfinished social prediction. You were building a model of who this person was, how they interacted with you, what they made you feel, where this was going. That model does not dissolve when they leave. It continues to process new inputs through its existing framework. This is why you catch yourself noticing things you would have shared with them, why you imagine their reaction to things they never see, why the fantasy is not just about romantic reunion. It is about the entire texture of a shared world that your brain started constructing and never got to finish. This is not obsession. This is incomplete schema processing. And here is what becomes possible when you understand that. You can begin to consciously complete the narrative in ways that do not require their participation at all. The language slows here because what comes next deserves more space. The fifth point is called permission to grieve a future. And this is the one that carries the most weight, not because it is the most complicated, but because it is the most honest. Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett at Northeastern University, whose work on constructed emotion theory has fundamentally changed how psychologists understand feelings, has written that what we experience as grief is often the brain's process of updating its predictions about the future. When you grieve a relationship that ended, or one that never quite started, you are not only grieving the person, you are grieving the version of your own future that you had already begun to simulate. Your brain had run projections. It had generated sensory and emotional predictions about what life with that person would feel like. Those predictions were real cognitive events. They consumed real neural resources. And when rejection arrived, it did not just end a connection, it deleted a forecast. Dr. Feldman Barrett's research, involving thousands of participants across multiple studies, showed that the intensity of emotional response after a loss is closely correlated not with the depth of the existing relationship, but with the density of future prediction the person had generated. Which means if you felt devastated by someone you were never even fully with, if the grief felt disproportionate, embarrassing, too big for what the relationship even was, this is why. You were not grieving a memory. You were grieving a simulation of a future that your brain had already begun to inhabit. And that future was real to your nervous system. That pain was real pain. You are allowed to treat it that way. Here is what all of this returns to. You were not too sensitive. You were not broken or pathetic or stuck in something you should have been able to leave more cleanly. Your brain was doing something extraordinarily sophisticated. Building models, running predictions, generating coping mechanisms, protecting a nervous system in distress. What you needed was not more willpower. What you needed was this information. None of what comes next requires perfection. It requires awareness, and awareness you now have. There is one more thing your brain does, not after rejection, but before it, that quietly shapes everything you just learned about. A pattern that determines whose rejection lands hardest, why certain people bypass your defenses entirely, and what your brain is actually looking for when it builds those simulations in the first place. If you do not understand that pattern, you will keep finding yourself in the same loop wearing a different face. That is the piece this video did not cover. Go find it.